Welcome back. In this video, we are going to create our first project directly from the Unity Hub. Therefore, open up your Unity Hub, go over to Projects over here, and then click on New. This will then open up this window where you can select from different templates. 2D is the template that you would use for 2D games, 3D of course for 3D games. Then the high definition RP is an option, whereas RP stands for render pipeline, and then you have the universal render pipeline, so here universal RP. But as this course is for beginners, we are not going to dive deeper into high definition RP and universal RP. We're going to focus on 3D and 2D games. If you want to find out more about the individual templates that are made available, you can click on this eye here and it will tell you what this is all about. And this is going to use the Unity's built-in renderer for 3D projects if we select it. Internally, a 2D project is also really a 3D project, but it doesn't use the Z-axis. So basically it's the same thing, but slightly differently designed or set up for you. And then you can see that these are options that are not by default downloaded, but you can download them anytime by clicking this download button and then use those templates. So you can see there's 2D mobile games as well as 3D mobile games, as well as AR and VR as options available. For now, we're just going to select the 3D option. Then you can give your project a name. I'm going to call this one My First Game and click on Create. Of course, you also can change the location if you feel like it. This will then take a little while because Unity needs to set up a bunch of assets for us. Because Unity needs to load the whole project, because as we have selected the 3D template, there is a bunch of stuff included there. And once the project is loaded, you should see something like this here. There's a lot going on and we're going to go over the individual aspects of it in the next video. But first of all, I want to make sure that Visual Studio is going to work for us correctly, because we have set up Visual Studio to be our editor that is going to be the one that takes care of the code. And in order to make sure that this is going to work, let's go over to Preferences and here select External Tools and make sure that Open by File Extension is not the one selected, but Visual Studio Community is the one that is selected. This is not the case by default. By default, maybe Open by File Extension is the one that will be selected for you, but in case Visual Studio Community was selected for you automatically, you're good to go. Otherwise, please select it. Your Visual Studio version might be different to mine, and especially if you're using a Mac, it will also be called very differently. So it will be something like Visual Studio Mac, for example. Okay, and once that is set here, we can close the preferences. We can go over to our assets here and create a new C# script in order to make sure that this is actually going to work, because otherwise you might run into problems later on. So just create a script here by clicking right click, create C# script, and then the script will be called new behavior script by default if you don't change the name for it. Now double click it and this should open up Visual Studio for you. And if you are not signed in Visual Studio, you will need to sign in to your Visual Studio account at this point. So make sure that you create a Visual Studio account if you don't have one. In case you don't have a Visual Studio account, which basically is a Microsoft account because Visual Studio is owned and created by Microsoft, you can go over to signup.live.com and there /signup. This will then allow you to create a new account. You can go through these steps here to create an account and then log into Visual Studio with your account. So once you're in Visual Studio, you can go up here to the top and log in or sign in to your Visual Studio account if you are not signed in already. All right, then once all of that is handled, let's look at what we have here. There's a lot going on and you don't need to understand anything that is written here for now. You're going to understand all of that later on, of course, because I'm going to teach you. But for now, I want you to type one thing in, and this will make sure that Visual Studio is set up correctly, which just makes sure that your Visual Studio is set up correctly so that you can, well, basically build games and develop code and write code that works well with Unity. Okay, and here just enter RI, and then if rigid body comes up, then you're good to go. And if it doesn't come up, then make sure that you really have this connection between Visual Studio and Unity. So then probably this setting here isn't selected properly. Okay, if that's not the case, select it. And if it still doesn't work, restart Unity, restart Visual Studio, and then check once again. So open Visual Studio through double clicking onto this asset here. And then Visual Studio will open up for you automatically. And then again, you can enter rigid body. So I'm showing this in so much detail because quite often this is something that doesn't work by default, or some settings are not set up correctly, and then suddenly my students get stuck. That's why I go over this in so much depth this time. But it's really important for you to do this correctly, because otherwise you will be stuck later on, and this is very frustrating. So let's try to avoid that. But we're not going to use Visual Studio for quite a while in this course, because we decided to first of all teach you all the good stuff about Unity and build a Unity game from scratch without writing a single line of code. So that's what we're going to do in the next chapter. But for now, let's look at the user interface of Unity. And that's what we're going to do in the next video. So see you there.